The private dining room of the upscale restaurant buzzed with low, expensive laughter and the clinking of crystal glasses. At the center of it all sat Victor Hale, a man whose name alone could open doors, or close them permanently. He was wealthy, influential, and fully aware of it. His tailored suit fit him like armor, his watch worth more than most people's yearly salaries. Executives leaned in when he spoke. Managers hovered nearby, eager to please. He didn't just command attention, he demanded it. When the young waiter approached the table, carrying a fresh bottle of imported wine, his hands trembled slightly. One wrong move in a room like this could cost him his job. Victor noticed the hesitation instantly. "Careful," Victor said loudly, leaning back in his chair. "That bottle costs more than you make in a month." A few guests chuckled. The waiter forced a polite smile and began pouring. A single drop slipped onto the white tablecloth. Victor's smile vanished. "Unbelievable," he snapped, pushing his chair back just enough to draw every eye in the room. "Do they hire anyone off the street now?" The room fell quiet. Conversations paused. Forks hovered midair. "I'm sorry, sir," the waiter said calmly, though his face had paled. "I'll replace the cloth immediately." "You'll replace it?" Victor laughed mockingly. "With what? Your savings?" The humiliation hung heavy in the air. The waiter stood still, cornered but composed, refusing to argue. His restraint only seemed to fuel Victor's arrogance. He enjoyed the audience, the power, the reminder that he could belittle someone without consequence. Around them, diners exchanged uneasy glances. Tension crept across the room like a silent storm. Victor leaned back again, satisfied, convinced he was untouchable. He had no idea the moment would cost him everything. Victor wasn't finished. The small stain on the tablecloth had become an opportunity, and he intended to use it. He stood slowly, adjusting the cuff of his jacket as though preparing for a performance. "Do you even know who I am?" he asked, his voice carrying across the room. "This restaurant stays open because people like me walk through that door." The waiter remained still, hands clasped politely in front of him. "Sir, I truly apologize. I'll have this fixed immediately." Victor scoffed. "Of course you will. That's what you're paid to do. Though judging by that suit, I doubt it's much." His eyes scanned the waiter from head to toe, lingering on the slightly worn shoes. "Where did they find you? Small town? No training? Or is this just natural incompetence?" A few uncomfortable laughs echoed from Victor's table, but most of the room had fallen silent. The manager hurried over, whispering apologies, offering complimentary dishes, desperate to contain the situation. Victor waved him off. "No. I want accountability. If he can't do his job, he shouldn't have one." The threat hung in the air. The waiter inhaled slowly. "Sir, I understand you're upset. I assure you it was an accident. There's no need to escalate this." "Escalate?" Victor's voice grew louder. "I could have you fired before dessert. I could make sure you never work in this city again. One call and you're done." The crowd shifted uncomfortably. Phones subtly tilted, recording. "Sir," the waiter said carefully, "there are procedures for complaints. We can resolve this respectfully." Victor leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to sound dangerous. "Respect is earned." From a nearby table, a middle-aged man cleared his throat. "If you're so certain you're right, why not just call someone? Let them handle it." A ripple moved through the room. Eyes turned toward Victor. He smirked, amused by the suggestion. "Call whoever you want," he said, spreading his arms slightly. "I'd love to see that." A low murmur followed. The waiter hesitated for only a second before reaching into his pocket. His movements were calm, deliberate. He unlocked his phone, scrolled once, and pressed a contact. Victor chuckled under his breath. This should be entertaining. The phone began to ring. Once. Twice. The room felt smaller somehow. Conversations had stopped entirely now. Even the kitchen doors had gone still. Victor folded his arms, confident. But as the ringing continued, a strange tension began to settle over the crowd. Who exactly was on the other end of that call? The waiter held the phone steadily against his ear, his expression unreadable. Up close, there was no tremor in his hand now, only focus. The glowing screen reflected faintly in his eyes as the call connected. Victor leaned casually against the table, swirling the wine in his glass as though this were light entertainment. "Make sure you tell them the full story," he said loudly enough for nearby tables to hear. "Don't leave out the part where you ruined a $1,000 bottle." A few uneasy smiles flickered around the room, but most people were watching the waiter. The phone continued to ring.
Once. Twice.
Victor checked his watch theatrically. "Tough luck," he muttered. "Guess your rescue team's busy." Before he could say more, the ringing stopped. The waiter straightened slightly. "Good evening, sir," he said, his voice respectful but firm. "I apologize for the late call." There was a pause. The room felt as if it were holding its breath. "Yes," the waiter continued, glancing briefly at Victor. "I'm at La Fontaine. There's a situation you should be aware of." Victor rolled his eyes and took a slow sip of wine, clearly unimpressed. Another pause. The waiter's posture shifted subtly, not fearful, but composed. "No, sir," he said carefully. "It's not about the restaurant. It's about a guest." The words hung in the air. A slight change came over the waiter's expression as he listened. The playful tension in the room began to fade, replaced by something heavier. Whatever was being said on the other end was not casual. "Yes, sir," the waiter replied. "He's standing right here." Victor let out a short laugh. "What is this? A bedtime story?" The waiter lowered the phone from his ear just slightly and looked directly at Victor for the first time since the confrontation began. His calmness was almost unsettling. "They'd like to speak with you," he said. Victor raised an eyebrow, amused. "Oh, I'm sure they would." The waiter extended the phone toward him. "They want to speak to you." Victor took the phone with a careless smirk, as though indulging a child's game. He pressed it to his ear without stepping away, fully expecting to end the call within seconds. "Yes," he said flatly. "This is Victor Hale." There was a brief pause. His expression remained amused at first, eyes half-lidded with boredom. "I'm not sure what this is about," he continued casually. "But your friend here seems confused about how businesses operate." Another pause. The faintest crease formed between his brows. "I see," he said, his tone shifting ever so slightly. The confidence hadn't vanished yet, but it had thinned. The room was silent enough to hear the hum of the overhead lights. Victor's posture straightened. "Wait, I didn't realize." He stopped mid-sentence. Recognition flickered across his face, subtle but undeniable. The color began draining from his cheeks, replaced by something dangerously close to alarm. "Yes, sir," he said quickly now, no trace of mockery left. "Of course I know who you are." A murmur rippled through the restaurant. Across the room, someone whispered a name under their breath as it became clear who was on the other end. The chairman of Victor's own investment board, the man whose signature determined the fate of multi-million-dollar contracts. A man known for zero tolerance toward public scandals. Victor swallowed. "No, sir, it's not what it looks like," he said, his voice tightening. "There's been a misunderstanding." The reply from the other end was short.
"Come. Cutting."
Victor's jaw clenched as he listened. "I understand," he said quickly. "But I assure you, I would never." He stopped again, eyes widening slightly. The silence stretched. Several diners leaned forward, sensing the shift in power, without hearing a word. "Yes, sir," Victor said at last, quieter now. "I'm aware of the review policy." Another pause. His free hand, the one holding the wine glass, trembled just enough to force him to set it down. "I'll handle it immediately," he added, almost deferentially. The call ended. Victor lowered the phone slowly. The arrogance that had filled the room minutes earlier had vanished. So had his certainty. Victor cleared his throat and forced a thin smile, as if he could smooth over the last 10 minutes with charm alone. The shift in his demeanor was immediate, almost desperate. "There's no need for this to become formal," he said, handing the phone back slowly, but not fully releasing it yet. "I think we've all let emotions get in the way." The waiter's expression didn't change. He simply held the phone steady. Victor let out a short, awkward chuckle. "Young man, I may have overreacted. It happens. We're all human, right? The room felt different now. The earlier tension had transformed into something sharper, awareness. People weren't looking at him with admiration anymore. They were studying him. It was a misunderstanding, Victor added quickly, glancing at the faces around him. A simple accident that got blown out of proportion. The waiter remained calm, composed, almost unreadable. There was no triumph in his eyes. No anger. Just quiet steadiness. The phone was still connected. A faint voice echoed through the speaker. Low, controlled, unmistakably authoritative. Though the words weren't fully audible, the tone carried enough weight to silence the room again. Victor's forced smile faltered. Yes, sir, he said stiffly. I've already apologized. The response came sharper this time. Victor's shoulders tightened. Of course, I understand optics matter, he muttered. Another pause. Whatever was said next struck deeper. Victor's jaw slackened slightly. An internal review, he repeated under his breath. The murmurs grew louder among the diners. No, sir, that won't be necessary, he said quickly, panic flickering beneath his attempt at control. There's no need to escalate this further. The final words from the other end were brief, but final. Victor lowered his eyes for the first time that night. The laughter was gone. And so was his leverage. Victor returned the phone to the waiter with a slow, deliberate motion, but this time there was no smirk, no playful arrogance. His laughter had completely vanished. The room felt heavier now, charged with a quiet electricity that made even the murmurs of nearby diners feel amplified. Conversations had paused entirely, and all eyes seemed drawn toward the unfolding moment. Whispers spread quickly through the crowd. Is that the chairman? Someone muttered. Another shook their head, barely able to believe what they were witnessing. A few discreet cameras lifted from purses and phones, recording the spectacle. Every frame would soon be shared, dissected, and replayed, amplifying Victor's fall from grace. Meanwhile, the waiter stood taller, his composure unwavering. The calm in his eyes contrasted sharply with Victor's sudden tension. No trembling hands, no stammering words, just quiet dignity. He had already reclaimed the room without needing to shout or gesture. His strength was subtle, measured, undeniable. From the far end of the restaurant, a figure entered with quiet authority, the chairman himself. His presence alone was enough to change the atmosphere. Employees at Victor's table shifted uneasily in their seats, instinctively distancing themselves from their formerly untouchable boss. The aura of dominance that had surrounded Victor for years now felt hollow, fragile, a performance stripped bare. Victor's posture shifted almost imperceptibly. Shoulders slumped, his chest no longer puffed in defiance. The confident man who had once commanded the room was replaced by someone suddenly aware of scrutiny, aware of the power he had misused. Every glance from the crowd, every subtle gesture from the onlookers underscored his exposure. Finally, the waiter spoke, his voice steady and controlled, cutting through the tension like a blade. Respect isn't bought. It's earned. The words hung in the air, heavy with truth. Silence followed, deep and profound, before quiet murmurs of approval rippled across the room. The authority figure nodded subtly from the doorway, acknowledging the shift. Cameras continued to capture the moment, but now the story was no longer about Victor's wealth or status. It was about dignity, integrity, and the undeniable reversal of power. Victor stood frozen, unable to reclaim the room, while the waiter returned to his position, calm, composed, victorious, without even raising his voice. In that instant, everyone present understood. The man who had once believed he was untouchable had finally been brought down, not by force, but by courage and quiet resolve. The public power reversal was complete. The moment the incident left the restaurant, the repercussions hit Victor like a tidal wave. Within hours, word had spread through the corporate channels. Emails circulated quietly at first, but the gravity of the situation couldn't be contained. A board meeting was called almost immediately, the chairman demanding explanations. Questions about decorum, public conduct, and leadership integrity dominated the agenda. Victor's personal assistant arrived at his office with a list of urgent items. "Sir, they're discussing your suspension," she said, her voice barely disguising unease. The possibility that his lavish titles and accolades could be temporarily frozen loomed over him like a shadow. Contracts with partners who had previously admired his ruthless confidence were suddenly being reconsidered. Investors sent messages requesting clarifications, and one even hinted that continued association might be risky. Meanwhile, the clip from the restaurant, the waiter's calm defiance and Victor's unraveling, was uploaded online. Within hours, it went viral. Social media lit up with hashtags, reactions, and endless commentary. Friends, rivals, and strangers alike dissected every frame. The world that had once celebrated Victor's wealth now scrutinized his character, and the judgment was unanimous. Desperate to contain the damage, Victor called PR consultants, legal teams, and even his closest confidants. Statements were drafted and redrafted. Press releases carefully worded. But no crafted message could undo what had already been seen. The public perception was shifting, and for the first time, Victor felt a crack in the armor he had always relied on. In private, panic began to replace his usual arrogance. He paced through his penthouse, phone in hand, repeating the conversations in his mind. Every step of damage control seemed insufficient. Every explanation felt hollow. The realization that power alone could not protect him gnawed at him relentlessly. Meanwhile, the waiter received messages of praise from colleagues, patrons, and strangers who had witnessed the event or seen the viral clip. Unexpected respect flowed in for standing firm with dignity, for refusing to be intimidated, for reclaiming control without resorting to anger. Invitations to speak at professional gatherings and offers of career advancement began trickling in. Victor, in contrast, was isolated. Even those who had once followed him loyally kept their distance. For the first time, he understood that authority could be fragile and reputation could crumble faster than it was built. The consequences were not just financial, they were personal, emotional, and public. And amid the fallout, the waiter found quiet satisfaction, the recognition of integrity far more valuable than the applause of the arrogant or the wealthy. Later that evening, after the crowd had dispersed and the restaurant lights dimmed, the waiter sat alone in a quiet corner, letting the adrenaline fade. He replayed the night in his mind, not with anger, not with thoughts of revenge, but with a sense of quiet clarity. Every glance, every whisper, every tension-filled pause had taught him something profound about human nature. He realized that standing up for oneself didn't require yelling, theatrics, or aggression. True power wasn't in intimidation or wealth. It was in composure, in measured actions, in the courage to hold one's ground while remaining calm. The confidence that had shifted the room tonight was quiet, steady, undeniable. It didn't demand attention. It commanded it naturally. He thought back to the earlier humiliation, the smirks, the public jeers, the condescending laughter. In that moment, it had felt suffocating, overwhelming. But now, with the power reversal complete, the memories seemed almost distant, like a storm that had passed. The contrast between that fear and his present calm was stark, a testament to the inner strength he hadn't fully recognized until tonight. Respect, he realized, could never be forced. Attempts to demand it through money, status, or cruelty were fragile and temporary. What endured was earned through integrity and composure. He allowed himself a quiet smile as he looked around the empty room, thinking of the final confrontation. The lesson wasn't about winning over the arrogant. It was about holding one's dignity, even when the odds seemed stacked against you. And in that knowledge, he felt victorious. Weeks later, the world had moved on, but Victor's life had changed in ways he could not undo. Board meetings continued without him, contracts were renegotiated, and whispers of the restaurant incident still followed him wherever he went. Social media clips resurfaced unexpectedly, reminding him, and anyone who watched, how quickly a reputation built on arrogance could unravel. Publicly, he carried himself with forced composure. Privately, panic and unease lingered like a shadow he could not shake. Meanwhile, the waiter had returned to his routine, but everything felt different. He moved with a calm assurance, his dignity intact, no longer burdened by fear or humiliation. Offers of career advancement and professional recognition came gradually, but his satisfaction was quieter, rooted in the knowledge that he had acted with integrity, not for applause. Peace replaced tension, and confidence replaced doubt. The contrast between the two men could not have been starker. One had wielded power recklessly, only to be undone by it. The other had stood firm, calm, and composed, emerging stronger than ever. And as he looked back on that night, the lesson was clear. The world respects quiet strength far more than empty bravado. Sometimes the loudest laugh is silenced by a single phone call.